Um, Bill was somebody that I've known about for a couple of years. Barb is not somebody that I've known about for a couple of years, and so I was excited when I got to learn about her through the internet, through emails and phone conversations, because this woman is a dynamo. You do not want to be on the other side of an issue from Barb. And to put voice to that, she rode a bicycle across country to raise breast cancer awareness, and that's where the award came from. That is in your program. And so the more you learn about Barb, the more you understand that she's not up here for any other reason than because she cares. And so let's give Barb Jarmuska a really warm Central New York welcome.
Thank you, Jack, and thanks to all of you who are here. I am a nutritional consultant and a wellness coach by trade, and in that venue, I would like you just all to stand up and take a few deep breaths and turn around and stretch a little bit. You've been sitting a little over an hour. Just kind of regenerate. Do whatever it takes to get yourself ready for part two here. Bill did a great job. My talk's going to be a little different. It's going to be real pictorial. I'm going to have you turn off the lights so that you can see the pictures. I would rather have you see the screen. You don't need to see me. I have a whole bunch of pictures to show you and some stories to tell you. So I need enough light to see my my notes, but that's... Yeah, I can see with that. Can everybody see the screen okay? Okay, great. I come from rural Pennsylvania, where we are indeed guinea pigs atop the Marcellus Shale. I sure wish that things had gone in Pennsylvania the way they have gone in New York, but they certainly have not. I'm going to start. This is a story that I'm going to tell you that started 400 million years ago in the Devonian Sea, when the gas was first starting to develop after the sea was buried by debris, and this is where oil and gas grew. And if we fast forward 400 million years to a company named Halliburton, we had known, industry had known that gas was down there for a long time, but they didn't know how to get it out. But Halliburton is really credited with developing the hydrofracking process that allows natural gas to be extracted from a mile underground using a whole bunch of very toxic chemicals that we don't know a whole lot about because we have not been told, because there are no laws that make them disclose it. There is a wonderful toxicologist by the name of Theo Colborn who has done great work in this arena, and probably more so than anybody else in terms of looking at what they are putting under the ground and therefore the dangers. And you can just see a little bit by that list of the various systems in the body that are affected by these highly toxic chemicals. What Halliburton had to do in order to bring this hydrofracking process to a reality was it knew that it had to exempt itself from 3 very important federal laws that really would have stopped this process, nipped it in the bud. The Federal Clean Air Act, the Federal Clean Water Act, and the Superfund Act. And the process of hydrofracking is exempted from all 3 of these federal laws as they currently stand. And once they were granted that exemption, it's known as the Halliburton loophole. It was passed in 2005, and then the industry began to go full steam ahead. And in my region of Pennsylvania, that's when the Blitz began, and the Blitz was green. And it's not the kind of green that we all are so fond of. It's the different kind of green. It's the cash green. And so the industry moved in and started spreading around lots and lots of money. This is one of those giant checks made out to my county for $25,000. The industry also hired away some very familiar faces and very trusted people so that they became the spokespeople for the industry. People that were already known names and trusted faces began to tell the residents of Pennsylvania how wonderful this industry was going to be for all of them. And it is one of the most cleverly developed PR campaigns that you could ever hope to look at from a sociological perspective. And if you see ads on television or you hear anything coming out of the gas industry and their various coalitions, such as the Marcellus Shale Coalition, they basically have a 5-part argument. And everything that they say, if you look carefully, it falls into one of these categories. And these are the claims that they continue to make over and over and over, that this is a bridge fuel, that it's adequately regulated, that it is environmentally safe, that it will eliminate our dependency on foreign oil, and of course, as Bill talked, they certainly dangle the money out there and say that it offers great wealth, enormous jobs, and economic opportunity for all. When in truth, it is not that at all. Between 2005 and 2010 in Pennsylvania, there were 2,498 wells drilled, and in just the last 2 years, there have been over 2,000 violations noted by the DEP, which is Pennsylvania's equivalent of your DEC. We call it the Department of Environmental Protection, also stands for Department of Everything Permitted. But, and what is really interesting to look at those number of violations is that looks like, oh, maybe they're doing a pretty good job. They cited the gas companies for over 2,000 violations. But what is really true is that 600 of those occurred during a 3-day blitz when they got the DEP staffers out of the office, put the boots on the ground, and actually sent them out to the wells to see what in the heck was going on out there. And during those 3 days, they averaged 200 violations per day. So what if they were doing that every day? What if they were showing up at the wells en masse, 365 days a year? That would equate out to approximately 73,000 violations of existing Pennsylvania laws annually. And our laws are pretty bad. We are still dealing with the Pennsylvania Oil and Gas Act written back in the 80s. We don't have any laws on our books either that even were written since the hydrofracking process has occurred. The rest of what I want to share with you tonight, folks, is a pictorial, and I just want to say thanks to the 3 photographers who have so graciously allowed me to use their photographs without charge and without copyright infringement, and these 3 folks are photographers who sell their work to Life and National Geographic, so this is not my next-door neighbors. Although I know these folks, and I just want to say that I'm very grateful to them. I have taken some of the pictures, but many of the pictures that you'll see were taken by them. So I am here to share my story with you tonight, and I am surely not alone. The lives of thousands of Pennsylvania residents have been changed for the worst. Our air and our water, our land and our way of life are under siege by an industry that has been carefully mapping out its strategy for years, repealing laws that could have protected us and pouring millions of dollars into political campaigns to be sure that industry pawns would be elected. Speaking in Sullivan County several months ago, Professor Terry N. Gelder of Penn State, the man known as the father of the Marcellus Shale, told an auditorium full of PA residents, of which I was one, quote, "This is a new technology. The gas industry is learning as they go along, and we have to give them a chance to get it right." He then, and I am not kidding you, he then quoted John F. Kennedy Jr. and told us that we must ask what we can do for our country and not what our country can do for us. And he proceeded to thank us for our patriotism because we have an opportunity to portray ourselves as good citizens because we are living in the Marcellus sacrifice zone. But the truth is we are not willing volunteers. We are guinea pigs and pawns of powerful corporations. Over 60 national and international energy companies have moved into PA and staked their claim to hundreds of thousands of acres of Pennsylvania. The DEP is issuing permits by the thousands, and by their own admission at a recent closed-door hearing, they are spending a mere 35 minutes on each permit before rubber stamping it through. The gas rush is on us, and the special place we once called home has truly become the Marcellus sacrifice zone. This is my front yard, and these next series of photographs are some that I took. This is my family going down to the creek that I live on to baptize my little granddaughter in the creek a year ago. This threat at my doorstep causes me to fluctuate daily between cowering in fear, basking in denial, and screaming in outrage. I have been an environmental activist for over 40 years, and never did I dream I would one day face such a formidable enemy. 5 years ago, I inherited 20 acres of land that my grandfather bought back in 1933, and I spent a very large chunk of my retirement fund converting the old family homestead into a small retreat center where I could welcome folks who needed to restore their spirits in a way that only a reconnection with nature and with music and with kindred spirits can provide. The land I live on sits along a beautiful, clear mountain creek known as the Loyalsock. This body of water that carries the designation EV, exceptional value. My property fronts this creek for 5,280 feet, exactly 1 mile. The memories my family has made here are priceless. For 5 generations, we have run in the meadows, swam in the creek, ridden our horses and mountain bikes in the nearby woods, and hiked the portion of the Appalachian Trail that runs only a mile from my property. For decades, the only access to this remote, beautiful, and wildlife-rich area was Butternut Grove, a narrow, no-outlet road that goes past my driveway and used to dead end at a hiking trail at the top of the mountain. Most days, not a single car drove by during my 2-mile walk along this road. The dog trotted off leash beside me. The neighbors who did drive by would slow down and wave, or stop to chat, as country neighbors are apt to do. The Loyalsock Creek is just over the bank in my front yard, a stone's throw from the road. I could ride my horse up the mountain to the place where the 1-lane road became a trail on state forest land. That trail is gone now, gated off and posted with trespass warnings carrying severe penalties. Chainsaws and hundreds of gravel-carrying dump trucks have changed the narrow trail into a wide gravel road through the forest and onto a well pad. Many trees were sacrificed to build that road. A vernal pool was destroyed, and once loved trail on the land called the Commonwealth is now off limits to me and all who used to hike, hunt, ski, and trail ride there. My daily walk and frequent horseback rides, as well as other simple acts of country creekside life, have come to an end. The company drilling the first well has 9 more planned for that once beautiful mountain ridge. The lives of my family and all Butternut Grove residents have forever changed at the hands of the corporation claiming the right to send its trucks up the road, to foul the air with diesel fumes, to generate noise, to disturb the ecosystem on the mountain, to haul truckloads of toxic fracking chemicals up and millions of gallons of toxic water back down. The same company also has a permit to pump over 1 million gallons a day from that creek, the Loyalsock, at a site just 20 feet below my property line. This beautiful creek that begins in a mountain lake and travels 64 miles on its way to the West Branch of the Susquehanna River, providing recreation for hundreds of fishermen and kayakers, inner tubers, swimmers, summer cabin dwellers, offering water that dances and glimmers and supports abundant fish, amphibian, bird, and wildlife. Water they now mix with their toxic fracking chemicals and force at great pressure into the wells of the Marcellus Shale. There are so many stories I could share. I can still drink my water. There are many people who can't. This is water that came out of a drinking well in Hickory, Pennsylvania, and the stories grow day by day. One of the most heartbreaking things for me is the fact that I get now between 70 and 90 email messages a day. My name is out there, and many times people just want somebody to listen to their story. And so I get emails and phone calls that are just heartbreaking to hear about people whose lives have been utterly destroyed. I'm going to tell you just a few of these stories. And the pictures no longer match the stories. We're just going to start a pictorial of the photographs of the industry that has moved into what was once rural Pennsylvania, the photographs taken by the 3 photographers, Terry, Kurt, and Rick, whose names I share with you. I'm going to start with a clandestine interview an interview that was granted to the grassroots organization that I am on. I'm on a member of the board of directors of the Responsible Drilling Alliance, and that sounds almost like a pro-industry grassroots organization. It is surely not. We picked the word responsible because 5 years ago when this organization started, we thought we really maybe could do this thing responsibly. We have come to rue the day we chose the name, but it's pretty much ingrained, and we do not believe that it's possible to do responsibly. There was a man who came to us who had been working for the gas industry at the well sites, and he quit his job or was about to, and asked if we would talk to him. And he is willing to be quoted, and we have since turned a larger portion of this interview over to the Philadelphia Inquirer, and we are hoping that they are going to do something with it, but this is a piece of it. I have seen terrible underhanded methods that subcontractor and energy companies use to dodge what is already minimal, inadequate regulation and oversight. I have seen with my own eyes on hundreds of different occasions chemical spills, diesel spills, drilling mud spills, and hazmat spills that are deliberately buried or covered up. Pennsylvania is much too wet an environment with far too much clean, irreplaceable drinking water to use the same methods these companies have used in all other states and other places to dispose of waste. Most of the time, it is either cost or laziness or convenience that drives this pollution. You can be sure that a spill on site is never reported to anyone, ever. They only hope the DEP does not randomly show up while they are hiding, burying, or cleaning the spill. There is always contaminated materials or dirt or fluid that goes unreported. They can't dispose of it properly because then the government agencies will know about it. In my experience, most contaminated dirt or fluid is either buried in a backhoe dug hole and then covered with clean dirt, sometimes right at the drill site, or it is tactically, at nighttime, on rarely used dirt roads, dumped into local streams or rivers. This happens every day. Everything these companies say to the people and to the press is sugar-coated lies. There is no other way to say this. Plain and simple, it's a big web of lies. I love this land. My family grew up here, and I grew up here. When the industry began, I was excited about it. I was grateful about what would happen to our local economy. I applied for a job. I got one. I had money coming in. But the cost of this non-sustainable, limited energy boom is far greater than anyone is being told. It is going to decimate all the water supplies and completely demolish what is left of our fragile ecology. The people of Pennsylvania have a very limited amount of time to wake up from their slumber. Despite making more than $1 million in royalties from drilling on his 105-acre farm, Wayne Smith, a farmer in Clearfield, Pennsylvania, wishes he'd never signed a lease. Some of his livestock mysteriously dropped dead following complete motor skill breakdowns. A veterinarian said the deaths were no doubt attributed to arsenic, high levels of which were found in water on Smith's property. Smith also worries about health problems he has developed, including frequent headaches and abscessed teeth. In Avella, Pennsylvania, a wastewater impoundment frack pond caught fire and exploded on George Zimmerman's 480-acre property, producing a 200-foot-high conflagration that burned for 6 hours and produced a cloud of thick black smoke visible 10 miles away. An EPA-accredited environmental testing company sampled the soil around the well sites on Zimmerman's property and found arsenic at 6,430 times permissible levels, and tetrachloroethylene, a carcinogen and central nervous system suppressant, at 1,417 times permissible levels. In southwestern Pennsylvania, used frack water gushing from overwhelmed sewage treatment plants grossly polluted the Monongahela River, home to a rich diversity of aquatic life and drinking water supply for 350,000 people. For a time, the river wasn't even fit for industrial use, and U.S. Steel actually had to cease production at its Pittsburgh plant. Last September, used frack water leaking from an old coal mine where it was being stored was responsible for extinguishing 161 aquatic species from 38 miles of Dunkard Creek in West Virginia and Pennsylvania. Victims included 18 fish species and 16 mussel species, 2 of which are candidates for protection under the Endangered Species Act. For most of the 1,500 folks in Dimmock Township, PA, and I'm sure you've all heard of Dimmock, life is no longer what it was before the gas industry arrived. On New Year's Day of 2009, a drinking water well exploded, taking out a house in the process. Investigators determined that migration of methane gas released because of faulty well casings had caused the explosion. Soon afterwards, neighbors started to report foul-smelling tap water the color of unpasteurized cider, similar to the picture that I showed you. 15 families in Dimmock have since filed a lawsuit against Cabot for poisoning their water, claiming that exposure to toxic chemicals related to gas drilling has led to personal injury, including neurological and gastrointestinal complaints. Some of Pennsylvania's world-famous trout streams, including many of the nation's last refugees of the troubled eastern brook trout, have already been damaged by water withdrawals for fracking, polluted by used frack water, and compromised by sediment runoff from roads and well pads. There is a law in Pennsylvania that you do not have to file an erosion and sediment control plan if what you are building is less than 5 acres. So in Pennsylvania, we have many well pads that are 4.999 acres, so that they do not have to account for all of the runoff going into our streams. The Nature Conservancy estimates that the brook trout will be extinct from streams in the Marcellus in just 5 years. According to current PA law, as I said, you do not have to file an erosion and sediment control plan. Legal water withdrawals are a major concern, and not all withdrawals are legal. Since June of 2008, 8 gas companies have paid a total of $2 million to settle charges of illegal withdrawals from Pennsylvania streams. The money will never replace the water or the damage done to the ecosystems of streams, rivers, and lakes. When they get their permit, which is called a consumptive use permit, to draw the water that they need for fracking out of the streams and rivers and lakes, there is what comes along with that permit is a low flow requirement saying if the stream drops below this level, you must stop taking water from the stream. What we have found is that the companies are taking it anyways because they would rather pay the fine and be able to continue with their work. Last week, the American Rivers Association named the Susquehanna as the nation's most endangered river because of the risk posed by drilling for gas in the Marcellus. One Department of Conservation and Natural Resource staffer claims, quote, "We hold Pennsylvania's water and woods in trust for the future. They belong to the public, but they're being cashed in. It's as if you had a tree that produced wonderful plums and you chopped it down for firewood. Tourism is our second biggest industry after agriculture. Even if all you cared about was the money, you'd object to cashing in sustainability." In Pennsylvania, Bradford County, that Bill talked about, has the dubious honor of being home to the largest number of Marcellus wells to date. I'd like to read you a letter written to Pennsylvania's Governor Corbett by Mark Smith, the chairman of the Bradford County Commissioners. It was written just last month. This letter came on the heels of the well fracking failure in Leroy Township and the subsequent spill of toxic frack fluids that lasted for 6 days and dumped thousands of gallons of frack fluid into a tributary of Towanda Creek, which is a tributary of the endangered Susquehanna River. Mark writes, "Dear Governor Corbett, issue after issue has arisen in Bradford County in relation to the development of natural gas. Most recently, there was a major incident involving a well blowout in Leroy Township. This major incident is just one more issue our county is dealing with in regards to the development of the Marcellus Shale. DEP officials are quoted in the media as saying they spend as little as 35 minutes to approve each gas well permit. This is an appalling statistic, considering the significant operation and impact of a natural gas drilling site, and even more appalling considering that there have been nearly 2,000 gas wells permitted to date in Bradford County. Well water contamination in Bradford County is a real and serious issue that is affecting residents' quality of life, livelihoods, families, and property values. Water buffaloes, temporary water storage tanks, now lay claim to people's front yards as a stark reminder of the extreme negative impact that the gas development is having on our local community. Emergency responders, state and local police, and dispatchers are working at breakneck paces to respond to the immense traffic accident increases, well site accidents, increased crime, and other gas industry issues. I have heard politicians in complete favor of the gas industry use the phrase, "We don't want to kill the golden goose." I would like to state for the record that the golden goose does not exist. It is no more part of reality than the Tooth Fairy, Santa Claus, or the Easter Bunny. And that ends Mark's letter. Even after living with this industry in my neighborhood for 2 years, there is still something unreal about it all. It still seems like some crazy sci-fi movie that I'm suddenly going to wake up from and say, "Whoa, I had a really weird nightmare." But it is very real, and we daily witness the intimately woven clash of values. The dividing line is deep. Simply put, it is corporate interests and private profits versus the quality of life and health of the land and all who walk, run, fly, swim, hop, and crawl upon it. The predictions of scientists not on government or industry payrolls do not bode well for our grandchildren and future generations. It would seem logical that we all want clean water, clean air, and healthy children, yet we are now sacrificing all three for corporate interests and the lure of enormous profits in the hands of a very few. I have a master's degree in special education, and I taught school back in the 1970s when the word autism was not a household word. And neurological disorders and learning disabilities amongst children since that time has increased 600%. There are many of us who believe that it is from exposure to toxic chemicals, many of which are being used by this industry. And what is important, especially for our youngest generation, is total toxic load. The multinational energy giants that have brilliantly laid the groundwork needed for them to claim ownership of our land have signed private leases under a veil of lies and omissions, and Pennsylvania's public lands have been leased by the state, giving gas companies the right to thousands upon thousands of acres of our once common wealth. In truth, 750,000 of Pennsylvania's approximately 1,500 acres of state land, or about half, is already leased. In 1962, a New Yorker magazine published the first of a collection of essays that would become Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring. In her book, Carson asked, quote, "Can anyone believe it is possible to lay down such a barrage of poison on the surface of the earth without making it unfit for life?" The chemical industry response to Carson was chillingly similar to the gas industry response to the movie Gasland and to those of us who are speaking out about the many and frightening unknowns we face in this rush to drill. At the time, and this was the 1960s, Monsanto called Carson, quote, "a fanatical defender of the cult of the balance of nature." The National Agricultural Chemicals Association published a debunking Carson piece, very similar to the gas industry's debunking Gasland piece. And they assured readers of her book that DDT would disappear from the human body in 90 days. 40 years later, DDT is found in virtually every human body in this country, including the unborn, who receive a pre-dose birth of DDT through placental blood. Today in Harrisburg, how ironic that our Department of Environmental Protection is housed in the Rachel Carson building in honor of this vindicated pioneer and champion of truth. The gas industry is counting on our ignorance, short-sightedness, and complete inability to learn from history. As the projected 100,000 wells in Pennsylvania are drilled and the landscape is forever blighted and industrialized, how many more children will be diagnosed with neurological disorders? How many more with brain tumors and cancer that the industry will deny all responsibility for? Who will bear the cost of treating the sick, cleaning up the spills, providing water to those whose aquifers are poisoned, and restoring streams and rivers when they no longer teem with life? How much destruction and heartache will this industry leave in its wake? The truth is, no one knows. And those in power, at least in Pennsylvania, are largely intoxicated by the promise of wealth. Truth vanishes when seen through the lens of greed. And even our local public television station filmed a live broadcast just last Thursday called Boomtown Williamsport. If we can't trust our legislators and government officials to hold the reins on this industry until such time that the true consequences of gas drilling and hydrofracking can be investigated and proven, where are we to turn? Daniel Webster once said, "Who will show me any constitutional injunction that makes it the duty of the American people to surrender everything truly valuable in life whenever the purposes of an ambitious government may require it?" Webster's question resonates in our midst in Pennsylvania as we watch our culture change. I live in a rural part of Pennsylvania that's probably very similar in geography and appearance to where some of you folks might live if you come from a more rural area. And truly, it has been a cultural transformation as the Texans and the Oklahomans have moved in and taken over the hotels and taken over the restaurants. My little town that used to take 10 minutes to drive across now takes a half an hour to get from end to end because of the trucks. The road that I live on, or the road that runs across from me, which is Route 87 North, which accesses World's End and the Endless Mountains, according to a DEP traffic survey taken 2 years ago, that road had an average of 700 vehicles a day on it, of which 10%, or about 75, were trucks. I can now count 75 frac trucks in 90 minutes going past my house, and the windows in my house rattle. So, what can you do about all of this? Well, I think the answer to that question is as different as there are different numbers of people in this room with different gifts and different talents. And what I would leave you with tonight is encouragement that you can do something. Those of us who live in Pennsylvania look to New York and are envious of the position that you're in because you still have what you most value. You still have your culture, you still have your land, and it has not yet been taken over. And I don't know what your individual gifts are. You may not be public speakers, you may not be letter writers, you may be able to just talk to other people, but each of you can do something. And I would ask you to look in your own repertoire and consider what you are best at and use that to become part of the reason that the gas industry has developed what they call an OMP. This was developed for them by a PR firm out of Baltimore. And OMP is the acronym they use for their outrage management plan. Because what the gas industry is most afraid of is your outrage. Because your outrage makes a difference. And so I would encourage you to be outraged at whatever level that is comfortable for you. That may mean carrying a protest sign or writing to your legislator or showing up for a lobby day in Albany or simply talking to your neighbors and making sure that the truth is known. The gas industry beat us in Pennsylvania. They got to people first, and they promised a new and better life. I own my own business, and I have 20 employees, and one of my employees leased his family's land to the gas company. They got $2 million for this lease. And this was a family of, for the most part, blue-collar workers who were comfortable in a home that they owned, and had a car and a TV set, and were kind of living the blue-collar, all-American family dream, as it were. They had plenty of food, and they got to take a vacation once a year and would hop on a plane and go to Florida and see Disney World. And now they are millionaires. And now they live in a 5,000-square-foot home that they just built. They each have a brand-new car, and there are 9 flat-screen televisions in their new home. So it is really about value systems, and it is really about what matters. But most of all, I believe it is what we are going to leave for future generations. I would encourage you, by whatever gifts and talents you have, to get busy. The fact that you're here tonight shows that you already are, because each of you has a role to play to help make your state's beauty and majesty more than just a story your great-grandchildren will hear. These are pictures of what Pennsylvania once looked like. It is rapidly changing, and I fear for the future of my family. I used to live 10 minutes away from my son and my little granddaughter and my daughter-in-law. I used to hop on my bike and ride up there and play with her for an hour to give mom and dad a break. They moved 3 miles from Canada, 8 hours away from me last year, because there were 7 gas wells very near where they lived, and they did not want her exposed to the air pollution and potential water pollution that they were exposing her to at the ripe old age of 12 months. I'm going to leave you with a poem called Hieroglyphic Stairway, written by Drew Dillinger, which is a poem that I have printed out and posted on the bulletin board beside my desk, where I sit and read my 70 to 90 heartbreaking and informative emails a day, because sometimes I just want to quit too. This is a very, very difficult battle, and we are fighting, as I said earlier, a very formidable enemy. And it is this poem that has kept me going as I read it and reread it. It's 3:23 in the morning, and I'm awake because my great-great-grandchildren won't let me sleep. My great-great-grandchildren ask me in dreams, what did you do while the planet was plundered? What did you do when the earth was unraveling? Surely you did something when the seasons started failing, as the mammals, birds, and reptiles were all dying. Did you fill the streets with protest when democracy was stolen? What did you do once you knew? Thank you.
I want to thank Bill and Barb for letting us know that we still have a chance to save, thank you, to save our beautiful upstate New York from this horrible destruction that Barb has described. And as Bill said, it's not even a choice that so often you see in the media between, well, is it jobs or is it clean air and clean water? We're not going to get the jobs in any long-term basis either, and we certainly will have the pollution and the destruction of natural areas for eons to come. So one of the things you can do is to stay informed, and there are lists here, if you have email, where I will put you on my list, and you'll get continued updates about hydrofracking and rallies and letters you can write, and whatever else you may want to do, talk to other people. This list will also include other environmental issues, but predominantly hydrofracking.
This question I know has been on the news and in the public a lot lately. It's 3 parts, and I'll ask all 3, and then one of you feel free to speak up. Can communities zone it out? Would a community act as a principal or primary aquifer, New York State description, have any leverage? And with the USGS maps aquifers, have they mapped areas that are planning on being fracked? And how do they feel about fracking? And Joe, I know you've had some experience with the legal issues with the zoning and stuff like that.
Well, as with most questions, this is complex, but clearly we have what we call home rule in New York, which generally means that only the state can regulate this industry, gravel mining and things like that, and they maintain that the towns can't regulate it. But towns can do a lot of control by zoning. This is a growing movement around Cortland County. And particularly you can have I can't believe it, but the town I live in, the town of Preble, has a very strong aquifer protection overlay in their zoning code, and it would prohibit this kind of toxic industry. So towns can clearly have zoning areas, residential. You don't want industrial practices in residential neighborhoods, and that's one of the things that towns can do. They can also pass road laws and things like that, but you can clearly have areas that it just can't happen in, and that's one of the things we encourage people to do, to start educating your town boards. It takes a while. We have some people here with a lot of experience in that over near Otisco Lake. Maybe we could come back to that. But yes, towns have quite a bit of power.
I don't think I have a lot to add except to, what underlies this is the difference between regulation and land use. Under the Home Rule Authority, towns have the ability to govern appropriate land uses. So when you talk to your town's boards, make sure they understand that you're talking about land use or police powers and not regulation, because the way the law is written, if it's a regulation, the state law takes precedent. But saying no is not saying how tall or how far or how wide something can be. Saying no is a land use decision, and towns do have that authority. That is actually needs to be tested in court to be absolutely certain, but there's a lot of legal evidence that says that's appropriate to do. I am not familiar with the principal and primary aquifer sayings in the draft SGIS, and so I'm going to have to pass on that part of the question, nor whether the USGS. If you look at some stuff that Bill Capel from the USGS has written, you may get some sense of what they're thinking about. I know he's got some stuff out there on water use.
And the warning from Pennsylvania is make sure that you have local officials who are on your side, because that is the problem that we have seen in Pennsylvania. We have zoning laws in the county where I live that the zoning that applies to a gas well is the same category of zoning as what applies to selling Christmas trees in your backyard or having a neighborhood festival. It is called a temporary permitted use. And the other thing that is happening in Pennsylvania is very frightening, and they are trying to get statewide zoning laws. So this is really a local, it's a basic democracy issue. Make sure you keep the control at the local level. And Bill is right. The local government cannot regulate the industry, but it can certainly have an impact in zoning. But it then becomes very, very important who you elect as your township board of supervisors, as your county commissioners. And so what we found, because the gas industry got such a leg up on us in Pennsylvania, that they already had their people in place by the time we woke up. They already had their allies in those positions. So really be careful what you vote for, who you vote for.
Thank you. We're going to jump from local to federal, because federal government was mentioned a couple of times. What is being done at the federal level in Congress to restore the requirements under the Clean Water, Clean Air, and Safe Drinking Water Acts that hydrofracking was exempted from?
I think we'll all just say zero, but why don't you take a crack?
Well, there's one bill called the Frack Act that's been introduced by Congressman Hinchey from the Southern Tier, with co-sponsors from Colorado. That's really the only bill that I know that has any viability, and it just sits in committee and goes nowhere. And this is the real danger of this industry, that we're up against huge, hundreds of millions of dollars of lobbying. Last year in New York alone, the figures were that $3.6 million was spent last spring on fracking. Only $700,000 of that came from our side. Chesapeake spent $1.2 million, more than all of the fractivists spent lobbying. So that's the kind of, that's what's happening to our democracy on every level. It's being bought, and this industry is Chesapeake, Exxon just bought into this a year and a half ago, spending $41 billion. Halliburton is into this up to their necks. This is who we're up against. It's just my kind of fight, and I know it's just your kind of fight.
I'm definitely not holding my breath waiting for some action on the federal level. I think that the reason for acting locally is that at that level, the government officials are a bit more responsive to the citizen input, and it gets a little bit more distant when you go to Albany, and then yet further distant when you go to Washington. And I believe a lot of these folks, while they may be well-intentioned, certainly there's a lot of money on the table that is as Joe mentioned, is fighting our interests. So start with your local government. As Barb says, get good folks elected to your local government, and they can maybe do something about this. In addition to the FRAC Act, of course, there is an ongoing EPA study of the safety of high-volume hydraulic fracturing, and also President Obama appointed a special panel to do a certain emergency 60-day, let's take a look at what we could do to do fracturing safer. I'm not sure where that's going. I would personally say that with the given government we have now and the Republican control of the House of Representatives, I'm not expecting a lot of action on any of those fronts, and I'm just hoping the EPA study survives.
Okay. I don't know if this is an interesting question, and so I'm not sure what you might know about it. Has there been any contact with the Chesapeake Bay Commission? I know there's been discussion about the watershed of the Chesapeake Bay. Does any of you have any?
I think the Chesapeake Bay Commission is just now starting to get involved. We were encouraged. We thought that we would go to them as a first resource, and this was 2 years ago. They actually came to Pennsylvania. One of the top guys at the Chesapeake Bay came, and they did a 2-hour presentation in Williamsport that was open to the public. They had about 200 people show up, and they did a question and answer. They did a PowerPoint presentation that was all about agricultural runoff and waste. There was no mention of hydrofracking. There was no mention of Marcellus Shale. And these were the top guys from Chesapeake Bay. Then they set up a very similar scenario to what we have here tonight. When we walked in, we were given a 3x5 card. They were passed forward to a moderator. They finally finished their presentation that basically they talked for 2.5 hours about cow poop. And we then got to the questions. And the moderator, the man in Jack's position, said he had a stack of note cards because there was 300 people in the room. He had a stack of note cards that were visibly a couple of inches thick, and he said, I'm going to read you one question, but basically every note card in my hands is the same question, and that is, what about Marcellus Shale? And their answer was, and I quote, we really don't know anything about that yet. And this was 2 years ago. So they're way behind. Our federal congressman from my area, we had a face-to-face, RDA had a face-to-face meeting with him, and he admitted, he said the gas industry is so far out ahead of us in every level. They have laid this groundwork, they have laid this network down, and they are just running with it. And it is so solid and so in place. But it still goes back to activism and voice. One of our best green legislators in the Pennsylvania House, Bud George is his name. He's been a Pennsylvania legislator, he's a Democrat for 30 years, and he has an absolutely stellar, 100% perfect green legislation voting record. He held a conference in Penn State last February, February of 2010, and he said, until you have a voice to one-to-one, to match one voice to every one of the dollars that the gas industry is spending, you will not turn this around. But if you can get that many voices, if you can start to match voices to dollars, you have a chance. So you folks in New York still do have that chance.
Thank you. This question makes a lot of sense based on Bill's presentation. Are there any studies which compare similar-sized counties in gas and non-gas states?
Well, in essence, the Headwater stuff did that, and that they looked at several different states in the West. And so I don't think they separated out this county in this state versus this county in that state, gas drilling in this state, non-gas drilling in that. But the net effect of their research was a set of counties that either had more or less gas drilling. And so it covered a regional basis. So that may be what the question is getting at. So there's that. I don't know of anything specifically focused on like this county and that county. Let's follow the two of those for a period of time.
Okay. All right. Thank you. A speaker at a previous talk I attended indicated that central New York, near Marcellus, the shale layer is too close to the surface, close to the water table to be drilled or hydrofracked. For this reason, will fracking likely take place in this area? Well, the statement is, little fracking will take place in this area. Is this true?
This is another one of the industry lies. They always tell people, we're not really going to drill here. We had an industry driller come to the Cortland group just as it was starting, and he ran the same line. The Marcellus is too shallow to frack here, so you don't have to worry about us drilling. Well, then you have to ask yourself, why are they spending all this money on seismic testing and leasing? And the answer lies in the Utica Shale, which is 3,000 to 4,000 feet deeper and runs right through Onondaga County, and why all those leases are signed. Cortland County, the map looks even worse than that, and it's the Utica Shale they're going to drill into. And so whenever you hear Marcellus, you have to think of the other shale layer that's below us here in Onondaga County, the Utica Shale. That's what they're going to frack. But they have all these great lines about, we're not really going to drill here, you don't have to worry about it. That's what they'll tell you 3 years before they start running those trucks down the road.
So, you know, in Onondaga County, the Marcellus Shale is shallow because it comes out in Marcellus, New York. In Tompkins County, at the northern end of Tompkins County, it's about 1,500 feet down, but by the southern end of Tompkins County, it's 3,500 feet down. So I'm not sure what number the speaker had used for too shallow to frack. Sometimes I've heard the number 2,000. Even if that were true, there's a lot of the Marcellus that is deep enough, and I think actually at 2,000, a different set of regs might kick in, but I think there's nothing that necessarily makes 2,000 too shallow to drill. It will depend on the quality of the resource. The deeper the shale, the more gas that's in it, so if they start petering out on gas, they'll stop whenever it becomes not economical. And as Joe pointed out, the big kicker is that once they have the lease, they also have access to shale layers that are deeper, the Utica being the primary one. So yeah, don't believe the line too shallow to frack.
Okay, thank you. Gas Frac is a Canadian publicly traded company. They frack the shale with gas without using water or chemicals. What do you think about the safety of their process?
So Gas Frac has had 2 accidents with their process, one of which is a few months ago. In the first one, they had an explosion. Nobody was hurt. They shut down for a while they tried to figure out what was going on. They thought it was too cold, so they figured things out, got set up again, and then a few months ago they had another accident in which some workers were injured, and again are trying to figure out what went wrong. So it is not safe. You have to understand that even though propane is stored by your house, one reason it's outside is it's not the safest thing, but the pressures used in high-volume hydraulic fracturing way exceed the kind of storage pressures we're talking about here. So it's a completely different thing. So don't get comfortable with the fact, like I got gas next to my house. It's a different thing. It's a gelled propane. It's under extreme pressures when they actually do the fracking. So the process is definitely not secure yet, and there are also issues with the cost and storage, and this is the amount of propane that's available to do the kind of fracking they're talking about. So from what I've seen, I was at a talk where that question came up. There's a representative from Chesapeake there, and while they said they were kind of looking at it, he said it's too expensive and still uses lots of trucks. And so that's kind of their take on it right now.
Okay. Anybody? This question's, I'm going to read the question and then I got a comment about it. At this point, how long do we have before Skaneateles looks like industrial New Jersey? Now, the thing is, I'd like to direct this to Barb. It's been a couple of years. How did it start to where it is now? You know, do you know what I'm saying? Is it totally obvious everywhere you go now, or is it still up in the hills kind of a thing?
If you are looking for well pads, they are very, very good at hiding those. You're not going to walk down the street and see a well pad, or in many cases, you're not going to drive down a secondary highway like, I don't know any roads around here, but a secondary highway that averages 700 to 800 vehicles a day traveling on it. They're not going to put a well pad beside that. They really don't want you to see what's going on. There was only one of those in Lycoming County on a fairly well-traveled road, and they built an enormous fence around it so that you could certainly see the top of the rig and the top of the trucks, but you couldn't see any people. So they hide these things. That slide that I had that was the well pad that's on top of the mountain on state forest land behind my house, it's on a hiking trail. And so that's one of their advantages, is they tuck these things away where when they have the kinds of spills that the gentleman who was working on the site told us about in the interview that I quoted for you, they are able to hide them because there's nobody watching. So in order to, what you will see as you drive on the rural roads is you will see the infrastructure damage. You will see these back roads full of potholes with crumbling shoulders, and you will see macadam literally turned pulverized into dust. And you will see a whole lot more rock slides. And you will see evidence of that kind of infrastructure damage. You will see small towns that are completely snagged with traffic that you can barely drive through. Towns like Towanda, 2 traffic light towns that now you sit in traffic the way you would expect to in a city the size of Syracuse. But in terms of seeing those wells, just to go for a country drive and see 6 or 7 gas wells, you have to know where you're going. And when people come to Pennsylvania and want to see gas wells, we take them on what we call the toxic tour, and we go around and show them where they are. But the gas companies are very, very clever at locating them. That's why the well that is up behind my house is at the dead end of a no-outlet country road that 20 people live along this road, and they're planning 9 more wells up there where they did 1, and then they are planning 25 wells across the creek from me along a mountain ridge in an old logging road. So many of those slides that I showed you tonight where you saw forests just being turned into those big muddy, ruddy roads, that's what they're doing. And so not only am I seeing hundreds of industry gravel trucks and frack trucks and chemical trucks and sand trucks going by, but I'm also seeing so many lumber trucks go by because they are just clear-cutting these swaths through the forest to get to the places where they are putting the wells. And so one of the problems that we're going to have that we can never remediate with this industry is forest fragmentation. And I don't know the situation on the forest in New York, but Pennsylvania has one of the largest, presently has or did, have one of the largest unbroken tracts of core forest in the entire United States. I mean, you think of that as being out west in Montana or Wyoming, but it's in Pennsylvania, and it's being chopped up. And that changes everything ecologically. And so we are building, they estimate that Pennsylvania will have 100,000 miles of pipeline. And the pipeline right-of-ways, and we just had a test case last week where they granted eminent domain to this pipeline company, which really was against the way our law reads. And so they're giving these pipeline companies eminent domain, which means they get to put them anywhere they damn well please. And they're talking about 100,000 miles of pipeline roads, each of them 60 feet wide, through woods, across streams, and again, I had a lot of slides of some of that pipeline being built. So the entire ecology of the regions is going to change. And once the pipelines are in place, then you take a drive and everything's going to look different. You're not going to be driving past miles of unbroken trees because they're going to have to start crisscrossing roads. But they think that there's probably going to be a pipeline with gathering lines every 4 miles in Pennsylvania. The grids are already drawn for these hundreds of thousands of miles of pipelines because you've got to get this gas to market. And the other thing that's going to happen, and Bill talked about this a little bit with these multinational companies coming in, is to get the price up. We're going to see a lot of it turned into LNG, liquefied natural gas. We're going to ship it overseas, and then we're going to buy it back. So they're going to create this loop. They're going to put a few extra hands in the whole thing, so that by the time it gets back, the price will be up, because it's not a moneymaker right now with gas where it is. they've got to get the price up to really make it profitable.
Perfect segue into the next question on the multinational thing. It is my understanding that some of the companies are foreign in Pennsylvania. Is that true about companies leasing in New York? And of course, we've got Chesapeake in both states. And so, go ahead.
Yeah. In Tompkins County, the companies that actually did the leasing were U.S. companies, but what is happening, as Joe reported at the beginning of the meeting, is a lot of them then flip the leases and are selling them. Chesapeake is finding at current gas prices it's hard to make money with shale gas, and so what they're doing is selling their shale gas leases and now touting shale gas liquids rather than shale gas. So these companies are doing what makes sense for them to make a buck, but not necessarily what makes sense according to their patriotic rhetoric that they used the year before. So no, I'm not aware. I mean, I think, again, some of the leases in New York State can easily get flipped, and I think that in Deposit, some were flipped over to a foreign company, but I don't have the number of acres with me here. But it has happened that companies that are doing business in New York have sold their leases to foreign companies. What I do want to say, though, it's not the same thing to say that because a foreign company owns the gas lease, that gas is going to that nation. What some of these companies are doing, as I understand from economists, is they're coming here to learn the ropes. So this is a good place for them to learn all the mistakes not to make. And then once they've done that with us, go back to their countries and exploit the shale gas resources there. That doesn't mean that gas won't get exported through LNG ports, but it's not true that every single company that's buying a lease here is then going to ship their gas elsewhere.
Anybody else? Nope.
The other thing that some of these bigger companies are doing in Pennsylvania is they're putting these smaller LLCs out in front to actually do the drilling. And thereby, if a problem is created, this little LLC company, Pennsylvania Gas and Oil, is one example. It is a homegrown PA company out of Warren, Pennsylvania. They did a lot of vertical wells, but it's a fairly small company. But they're actually subcontracting some of this drilling out. So if a really catastrophic event were to happen, then that company doesn't have the resources. They just disappear. And the cleanup mess, because this industry is exempt from federal Superfund laws, falls back onto the backs of the local community to try to deal with it.
Before I give it to you, I did want to add to what I said. I forgot to add this part. I mean, again, these are business decisions by businesses, and so the gas is going to go to the highest bidder. And so the way I think Arthur Berman put it, is that in Japan, for example, if they really need natural gas to replace their fission plants that are now burnt up, they will pay a high price for gas, and that means that our gas will go to Japan. So it's not just that it's going to stay in this country because it's produced here. It will go to whoever's willing to pay the most for it.
A lot of the work I do recently is lease termination workshops, because down in Cortland, I'm going over to Norwich tomorrow night. And one of the things that I've learned in preparing for that is that this is just a big monopoly game to companies like Chesapeake. And the best example of that is, I gave the one example where they'd sold some of the leases here to a Norwegian company. Chesapeake sold all of its Fayette Shale leases, I think that's in Arkansas, to an Australian company, BHP Billiton. So what they do is they go around and they hoodwink people into signing leases. We've recently discovered documents that show the lies they're told to tell in order to get you to sign a lease. They certainly never tell people about the dangers of leases the way they tell their investors when they file SEC statements. And we hope that there's some major national newspapers working on this. But they sold all of those leases for $4.75 billion and then turned around and bragged about the reduction of their corporate debt. So that's what's going on here. It's just making money for huge international corporations. The Chinese are buying into it to gain the expertise. That's what we're up against.
Thank you. Thank you. Next question. The individual landowner cares about his own lease income, not so much the general economy. What is the impact to that landowner when you consider what fracking does to their own property? So somebody leases to make some money on the lease, what happens to the value of their property?
You want to start that, or? Okay, all right. So I've been going door to door in my own community asking people if they would sign a petition asking our town board to ban high-volume hydraulic fracturing in my town. And what I'm finding is that, you know, there are many people out there who own 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 acres of land, and they realize, you know, I'm actually not going to get that much money in royalty payments. And I know that there's going to be problems with truck traffic or this, that, or the other. And so it's really only the fairly small number of large landowners that stand to gain a lot of money. So again, when you look at the picture, it's not that no one will make money, but look at where the money goes and look at how it travels. And so it's a relatively small number that will make big bucks, and a lot of people will pay the cost. It's what they call, you know, you socialize the costs and privatize the benefits. So it will depend on how big that person's land is. If you own enough land, even if your water goes bad, then you can afford to leave or do something about your water. But if you're a small landowner, you can't. So that the question can't really, I guess, be given a simple answer, because it would depend on the situation. It's also a crapshoot. I will not stand here and tell you that every single gas well is going to pollute groundwater. Okay, but I will tell you that some gas wells will pollute groundwater. It's not zero, and it's not 100%, but it's some fraction of them. So if you drill enough wells, you're going to pollute groundwater. And if you drill enough wells, they're certainly going to spill stuff, as we've already heard. So some people are definitely going to have problems that they'll have to pay somehow to take care of. But it's Russian roulette. It's odds. It's not this landowner will pay this much for that. You just don't know. So some landowners will make out fine, and a lot won't.
And what we're seeing in Pennsylvania is some of the larger landowners who have leased for $2,500 or $3,000 an acre have gotten as much money by leasing their land as they would have gotten by selling their property. And many of them, especially farmers, have moved on. They have retired and moved to warmer climates. The people that are really hurt by this are the smaller landowners who did either, whether they leased or not, they did not have enough land to get a big chunk of change if they leased. Let's say they had 2 acres. Okay, that's $5,000 in lease money. So then they are surrounded by wells, a few of which have gone bad, and their properties are basically worthless. We're seeing properties now in Pennsylvania that are worth 10 cents on the dollar based on what they were worth just a year or 2 ago. And this comes directly from real estate agents who are involved in that. Very similar to what happened in Dish, Texas. And I don't know if you folks have followed Calvin Tillman or heard him talk, but we have many, many homes. You drive through Sonestown, Pennsylvania, in Sullivan County, and you will see for sale signs on every other house. You don't see any sold stickers on those for sale signs. These are folks who live on a half an acre to an acre of land in a small rural community that was a sleepy little town whose main industry was tourism, and they now have 800, 900, 2,000 trucks a day going down their front street, the main street of these little towns. They don't want to live there anymore. Well, neither does anybody else. So these folks didn't get any lease money, and they don't have any money except what they have tied up in their property. They can't afford to own 2 properties, so they're stuck where they are. And that's what we're seeing, and that's really the tragedy of this thing. And that's why the Penn State report was also so skewed, and Bill talked about this. They acted as if all of the money that people got from this industry was going to be spent in Pennsylvania. But what's really happening is these large landowners are taking their money and moving elsewhere. They don't want to be here any more than the rest of us do and watch this happen, but they were able to cash in. The other thing that happens is if someone leases a small tract of land, let's say 2 or 3 acres, just because they're surrounded by leased land, and the landman says, hey, you either take your money, we're going to close this deal, and believe me, I've been there. Anadarko was the company that came knocking on my door a year ago, and everything that was in that as yet not totally validated landman's manual, she said to me. The Anadarko land woman was from Binghamton, New York, and I played along with her for about 4 visits and acted dumb and let her think maybe I really was going to sign just to hear what all kind of hoops she was going to jump through and what all kind of promises she was going to make me. It was an interesting learning experience. But the FHA will not grant a new mortgage on a leased property. So you can't then turn around and sell your property. Even if you go, whoops, I'm going to get out now. There's no gas wells around here yet, and my land is leased, and all my neighbors' land is leased, and I better sort of make hay while the sun shines and sell while I can. Well, those properties aren't selling either, because banks are not looking favorably on granting mortgages on leased land where they know there's a bunch of wells coming in. They don't want to be stuck any more than the landowner does. So it creates all kinds of problems like that.
Yes, I want to add, I do know of one study out of Garfield County in Colorado in which they looked at property values and drilling and found, no surprise, at least quantified that the property values went down when there was drilling on or near the property, and that those property values, even when that drilling phase ended, they rebounded but did not rebound to catch up, I guess. It was a permanent depression in the property value. Which obviously can impact then the revenues of the towns, and Dish, Texas is one that was particularly hurt that way. They certainly found they had a lot less money than they used to have because property values went down so much. I've also talked to bank loan officers in the Tompkins County area, and uniformly a lease is considered a negative factor when approving a lease, when approving a mortgage. Doesn't mean they won't give you a mortgage, but it definitely means they look at everything harder, and they're starting to ask these questions about, well, what are we going to be able to do? The FHA won't give a loan if there's a surface rights on the property. So if you can get release of surface rights, you may be able to get an FHA loan, but there's also a requirement as to how far the drilling has to be from the structures on the property, and unfortunately property boundaries don't pay attention to that. So you might want a loan on this property, but your neighbor leased it has a drill, it might violate the FHA conditions, and you have nothing to do about it. So there's a lot of issues, but basically property values go down where there's drilling. Some property may increase in value because of the sort of cashing in, let's try to gamble on gas drilling. There's not a lot of hard data, but where there is hard data, property values have gone down where there's been gas drilling.
Okay. Next question. How many communities in New York State are receiving fracking waste from Pennsylvania and other states?
Well, we know that Auburn wastewater treatment plant is taking frac fluid. There's a demonstration scheduled there next week, I believe. I'm sure somebody here has information on that. We know that Watertown took some. And now, so you have we shouldn't call this wastewater that comes out of these wells. This is frac fluid. It's highly radioactive. It's 6 times saltier than seawater. It has the hundreds of chemicals they put in it, and it comes out with the heavy metals of strontium, arsenic, chromium. It is toxic. So that's one problem, the water. Now they're dumping the drilling muds and other solids. You hear them brag about recycling their water. What that does is concentrate these toxics. They can take the water out, and they just keep concentrating the toxics. That's being taken down to Chemung County landfill. That's why the bill that's pending in Albany that labels everything that comes off one of these pads as toxics becomes very, very important, because then you have to have manifests, you have to track it. So it's going at least to those communities. We know they're trying to, last year over near Keuka Lake, Chesapeake wanted to do a deep injection well to get rid of their frac fluids. They would have put that within less than a mile of Keuka Lake, which is the Y-shaped Finger Lake. That really woke people up. That's the people that made All Fracked Up, the movie, Jeff and Jody Andrazik. That woke them up. They just about gave up their lives to start being fractivists. And now in Watkins Glen, this is another thing that we don't talk about very much, the storage of gas. Every gas lease I've looked at, which is now well over 300, the first paragraph not only gives away the right to drill, but to store gas under your land. Very few people understand that it's in there because it's so small and it's so crammed in. In Watkins Glen, they want to put a gas storage facility in the old salt mines. Can you imagine what that's going to do to that community, given the very few number of roads? So it's not just the drilling. It's all of these toxic waste that it creates. This is a seasonal industry. They have to store it. They're going to want to store it in the abandoned salt mines that are so common to the Finger Lakes.
Thank you. This question is kind of a statement. I haven't seen any shale economic analysis, including climate change adaptation needs. Ozone is predicted to increase in gas drilling areas, and New York State has a climate advisory commission. Has there been any studies done that includes dealing with climate change adaptation?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Yeah. How finite is the gas in general areas? Is it possible to determine the exact quantity of gas?
Generally, the answer is no. I mean, have been measurements have been made to determine things that give indicators of how much gas is in the shale. So there's indications of how deep it is, how thick it is, how much organic content it has, and how, as they call it, thermally mature it is. Basically, how well it's been cooked into natural gas from the organic matter that was shown earlier as raining down in the old sea. But that doesn't really tell you how much gas is there until you go down there and poke around. So that's why exploratory wells were drilled. So what we do know is that gas is there, but in terms of like exactly how much, not until a lot more wells are drilled. And that's part of what they're learning in Pennsylvania, and if they do move in New York State, well, they'll be learning as they drill. It is kind of a learn as they go thing. So they have general ideas, but if you want exact numbers, not until more wells are drilled in the Marcellus will they really know how far the fairway extends and how much gas is there.
There's one question here about property values, and I think that's been answered already in the discussion. And this will be the last question, and then we'll be able to conclude. Is there any effort to capture escaped methane, which is reported to exceed even global warming potential of coal plants? Is there any effort to capture escaped methane from gas drilling that's reported to exceed even global warming potential of coal plants?
Okay. So there are better and worse practices in drilling and completing is the other part of it, the gas well, but nothing captures all of the methane. For a variety of reasons. A bunch of the methane comes out. So first you have to understand that when you drill and fracture a shale well, the biggest production starts on day one and declines thereafter, and actually declines quite rapidly in the first couple of years. So what happens is when they fracture the well, they go down, they drill sideways through the shale, they do their hydraulic fracturing, and then they fracture the end of the well, they do a cement plug. They fracture the next section, they put a cement plug. And when they're all done, they have to go and drill out all those cement plugs. A lot of the methane that leaks out comes out during that drill out phase, during the well completion. I don't know, I've never seen a plan about how they're going to cap something over the well to capture the methane. Is it impossible? I don't know, but I haven't seen a plan for it. A lot of the other leaks come from various valves. You can have better valves, less leaky valves, or more leaky valves. The numbers in the Howarth and Graffia paper actually give you both the good valve and bad valve type values. They give you always a best case and a worst case. Even in the best case, over 20 years, it has more global warming potential. The other big factor is the transmission lines, and there are leakier lines and less leaky lines, but I don't think we're about to dig up all the thousands of miles of gas pipeline to fix all the leaks. I just think that's an economic cost that no one is talking about paying. So yes, there are thoughts and there are certain things that are being done, there are best practices. The question also is what's really going to be done in the field. And my understanding is, again, if you look at the Howarth and Graffia paper, they try to look at a best practices and a worst practices, and the answer will probably be somewhere in between.
Okay.
And I guess, is that our last question?
I got a statement to make. But
Okay, I've got a shameless plug. So we have stuff over there and lots of information up there, but if you want all kinds of background information on many different aspects than we could possibly talk about here on gas drilling, there's a website that my wife and I have created called TC, for Tompkins County, tcgasmap.org. In addition to the map of our gas leasing in Tompkins County, there's tons of articles, and I really, request that people make use of that as a resource. We put it on the web so that when you want to know something about economics, or you want to know something about environmental impacts about, say, fish and wildlife, there's a set of articles on just that topic. There's a set of topic on noise, or you name it, it's there. So please make use of that and pass it around to your friends, because we put it up there so folks can use it when writing comments on the draft SGIS, or for, when you want to talk to your legislators. So please take advantage. It is the letter T, the letter C, gasmap.org.
And I'm going to give each of you, maybe that was your chance, a chance to have a word at the end. However, I want to let everybody know, since people are getting up to leave, this video will be available on the Noon website, the peacecouncil.net/NOON. And if you picked up any information from over there on that table, that'll have the Noon email address on it. And that website, Nick will get it posted in, who knows, hours, days, sometime. It'll be up there. And if you signed up to be on the email list, we'll get the word out to you that the video is posted. Okay, I'd like to give Joe a chance to close out a minute or two, and then Barb, okay?
Well, I've been doing political legal work in upstate New York for 40 years, and I have never worked on an issue that people get as deeply as this. That's not meant to be a pun. One of the things Barbara and I were talking about before is that one of the silver linings to this horrible danger is the people that we've met, the organizations that have been started. Organizations seem to be starting almost every day in upstate New York and the Finger Lakes. There's an active group here, Shale Shock Central New York. I urge you to become involved with it. There's an active group in Cortland. Every other Sunday night, 30 people come out, volunteers, and they've been doing it for 2 years now. There's a new group in Auburn that's leading this rally. This is people against corporations. And they're going to outspend us 100 or 1,000,000 times to 1. So far, we still are holding our own. But this is a long, long road race. We're just getting started. We need every one of you to become more active and get 10 more people to become active. Thank you.
I would just back that up and say, don't let it happen here. Look to your neighbors to the south, look at the state of Pennsylvania, and do whatever it takes to save your state. The organization that I serve on in Pennsylvania is the Responsible Drilling Alliance, and that is our website, responsibledrillingalliance.org. A lot of what we do does have to do with Pennsylvania, but there's also a lot of good generic information. We put out a newsletter once a week, and it costs nothing to join. You just go to responsibledrillingalliance.org and sign up, and every Tuesday in your inbox you find out what's happening in PA. And as I say, there are many things that are about the industry and not about the state in particular, so we would love to have you join. And it helps us when we go to Harrisburg and say we are a 2,000 member organization. We don't have to say that 800 of those people are from New York. We can just claim our membership. So I would really appreciate it if you would join. But just, as I said in my talk, folks, find out where your gifts are and use them, because this is a fight of your life, and it's a fight for your life, and most of all, it's a fight for your grandchildren and your great-great-grandchildren. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you so much, all of you that came, all of you that spoke, and all of you that I know are going to go to your local officials and say, do what you can, and you're also going to go to any of the groups that you heard about. And is there anybody here from a local town board? No. Get your town boards involved. And thanks again. Enjoy. Come up and chat as we pick up. Bye-bye.